So the framework that you describe in the book
Yeah.
relies on the collection and analysis of data, a lot of data. And armed with data, we can optimize the allocation of our resources, whether dollars into projects or projects into gains, right, which is another term that you use frequently. But the type of data that we need is ecosystem-wide, right? Big sets of data. And the expansiveness of that data supersedes the interests or the scope of any entity that would be collecting that data, right? So who is going to be responsible for collecting and analyzing this data?
Well, I think we have to get into the collection game in the beginning. And right now we're just not doing that. But
on a big enough scale.
On a big enough scale, I mean it's really on a paltry scale. I mean, big data, as we have come to understand it in these last few years as a society, has great complexity and vast breadth. And we really, in the environmental space, we really haven't done a decent job of monitoring, of collecting data of the projects and the work that we have done, or the current state of affairs as it is. It takes us decades to make an informed map of, where are our environmental hotspots in terms of, what's going on in our waterways and water quality parameters. And we don't have to take that long anymore. I mean, given what we can do by stitching together a lot of varying pieces of information and deriving some insight from that, we can do things today that we couldn't do 2 years ago. And I think what's happening is we're just barely scratching the surface on what's available and what we need to do. And so, I really do view this fundamental accounting and collection of data as an enabling condition. I think so many things can happen after that. You alluded to how we allocate dollars with greater precision, how we understand what we get when we, if we do project A versus project B, which types of uplift are available from those, and how do we track them from our baseline to our ultimate outcome. And so I think we're really at the beginning of this, and I think we all realize that this is an imperative. If we don't do this, we're really flying blind on all of our effort. We can feel good about that, but the fact is it's not adding up. And I think we've come to the place now where we know enough of the indicators that we do see that we're like, we really gotta drill down on this stuff.
One of the points that you mentioned just now, we've moved from the past where we feel good about what we actually have done, right? We're like, oh, look at these trees we've planted. Look at this, this effect that this has had. Where now we have the data where we can actually sort of understand what's going on, right? And I see that as a blessing and a curse, right? Because and specifically what I wanted to get your thoughts on is the discrepancy between the specificity that big data allows us, right, where we can say, which tree and which place and which, is going to have the most impact on this, on all of these different metrics, right? So it allows you to really get that specificity, but the counter to that is the scalability that we need, right? So do you have any thoughts on how we can sort of harness the specificity that big data avails us with the scalability that we really need to have an impact on the scale that we need to have an impact on?
Right. We don't have to track every ladybug's footprint. There are indicators that we've always known of indicator species, but we can do a little bit more than that. I mean, you talk about the tree. The tree, which we've always known, it's great. It's a tree. It's good. Plant a tree. It's great. Which is, it's better than not planting a tree generally. But if you're spending limited dollars on, it's really, you don't plant a single tree and expect that you're going to get a ton of uplift.
Right.
But the fact is, that tree does more than just be a tree, right? I mean, this is the great revolution that we're moving into. Its roots stabilize the bank. We can track that in terms of sediments, pounds of sediments. We can track how much carbon it sequesters. We can track what nutrients are taken up through the root system. We can track the kilocalories of solar gain that are blocked from coming into a watershed by virtue of its leaves. And while we can track all those things simultaneously, we can really dial into the one that we need and leave the others behind. Mm-hmm. We get those. I mean, we win those when we make those types of restoration actions happen, mm-hmm. and we can understand them, and we can look at each different parameter, mm-hmm. Either in isolation or collectively across a project site or a river reach or a forest itself. Mm-hmm. And so there's a pixelation that's available to us in this. And I think, I just mentioned 5, but the fact of the matter is we can track, to your point, mm-hmm. we can track tons.
Right.
And so what we have to do is understand that there's this toggle between complexity and simplicity that's really important, that you don't have to understand how your phone works to be able to use it. And there's great simplicity on the user side of the phone, and great complexity if you've ever broken your phone screen and tried to replace it yourself. You open that thing up, and holy smokes,
yeah,
there's a lot of stuff going on in there that I had no idea.
No idea.
But I don't have to.
Right.
I just need to have confidence in how it was built, and that's the challenge for us. For us as a scientific community, and ultimately as a conservation and financing community, that can begin to get what we need. I mean, the architecture of technology allows us to, have that simplicity and complexity, so we can, for the first time, streamline processes and truly not shortchange the environment, mm-hmm. Procedurally, because we can just do things quickly.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's definitely an exciting challenge to have.
Yeah, and this is one of those philosophical barriers that we have to just kind of allow ourselves to work through. I'm kind of on the old end of the young or the young end of the old. And so I have, I have a law degree. We sued people.
Right.
That's what I did the first few years.
You're an attorney.
I'm like,
yeah.
Assimilate, just this is how we do it. So mm-hmm. do it well, do it hard. But the fact of the matter is, if you really look objectively at what's going on, we have to shift our tools. And a big part of that shift is allowing ourselves say, hey, I get it. We don't have to track everything, but we do have to know that it is tracked and accounted for in some way, mm-hmm. that we feel that we feel adequately represents what needs to be tracked, mm-hmm. and accounted for. And if you talk to the science guys, they will say right now we have a handful of ecosystem services or environmental values that have been unitized so that we can track them, and they're kind of the quick and easy ones: nutrients,
sure.
temperature. It all comes down to functionality. They say we will have maybe 40, 50 parameters or currencies that could be tracked off of any given project site. Hmm. And what we see is there will become an opportunity for funders of whatever stripe, with whatever motivation, to essentially purchase an outcome, whether it's for a straight conservation purpose and retire it in the name of nature, or someone who has an impact that they have to offset on a 2-to-1 basis or a 3-to-1 basis, so that we get the environmental gain that we need. But right now, this is very new, and we have to allow ourselves the ability to experiment, mm-hmm. and fail. If you look at kind of our 45, 46 years of the modern environmental movement, mm-hmm. We've had plenty of failures, and that's okay. That didn't keep us from trying. We're like, oh my gosh, we may not be able to save it all if we start,
sure.
in 1969, but heck, we're going to try.
Yeah.
And that's important to let ourselves do that now.
It's interesting that you use the terminology currencies, right?
Yeah.
When you say these 40 or 50 different parameters that we have, and obviously the next logical step in that is thinking about currency,
right?
Like actually thinking, how do we monetize these things? To whom can we, market these things?
Well, one of the great failings of environmental markets, which they sort of exist now, but they sort of don't.
Right.
One of the great failings is we have these kind of civil war currencies, where what counts in Maryland doesn't count in Virginia, and what counts in New Mexico is different than how they do it in Oregon. And the fact of the matter is, that's wrong. We have to standardize the biological, legal, and transactional mechanics of all of these things so that they're the same to a great degree wherever you are. I mean, a quarter in the United States is worth 25 pennies anywhere in the United States.
Sure.
And a dollar is worth 100 pennies.
Sure.
And we have to get to that level of sort of standard unitization so that we can make informed trade-offs, so we know what we're giving up every time. Historically, we just haven't known what we've traded away, and we're paying the price now.
So speaking of this, when we think about water, when we think about the forest, when we think about ecosystem services, right? If we don't think of them as assets, then obviously we're economically incentivized to use them until they're scarce. Right? This is something that you touch on in the book, actually quite frequently. How do we bring about what can we do to bring about the advent of closed loop accounting? What's missing? Right?
Well, the first thing, we've got to send up the flare. I mean, my big motivation for writing the book was just to credibly call the question, hey, shouldn't we do this? Because anybody who really takes a close look knows that we should.
Right.
We've been a little bit flummoxed by how we do that. I mean, it's kind of the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed, right? But the big thing around how we go about doing this is just getting started. I mean, it really is just about getting started. You alluded to water, and of course I'm a water guy. Water has been water is priced, but it's not priced by a market, and that means it's free to some who have all the wrong price signals on how they use that. And yes, I'm speaking of agriculture. I grew up bucking hay, so I can kind of take that tone with agriculture. And so where I look, I mean, one of the things that I did was sort of scan the globe. Where is it working, and how do they do that right? And when you don't price it by a market, it gets misused, mismanaged, and is treated just as an input into a product that has value, but the inputs have none, and that ultimately leads you into a place where you have, I mean, nature makes drought, but humans cause shortage. And the earth doesn't have any more or any less water today than it did when it opened up for business.
Sure.
And yet, when the water turns up, in what character and quality it turns up, or if it turns up, that is strictly human caused.
Right.
There is no interpretation around that. That is us. And so, one of the great examples that I've seen is, of course, Australia, where they got hit in the jaw, with you have a problem that you must correct, and so essentially there was a buy down of their rights, second or third largest payout by the government in their history, and they got their users to come back into a sort of a water share agreement as opposed to just sort of a straight up right. And then they can, there's a flexibility to that where they can understand in a dry year their water as a market priced asset would be worth more money if they sent it into the market. So they may shift their cropping patterns or their crop types, and do more, do less. And what we've seen is across the initial years in this, they've seen some ups and downs, but on balance, it's water as a commodity indexed against the others is doing really well. And so I think you'll see some form of that beginning to happen in California. I kind of think of it as the California model, where you will see a flexible use or share use, where folks can start seeing the market price water. And inevitably, what you will see in a situation when it's properly sent, when the right price signals are sent, and the right water budget is there, that's based on the physical water available, with your environmental and social needs met. I think what you're going to see is less thirsty, higher value crops, and people using water as an asset in their portfolio, how they manage it year to year.
So a company that you mentioned in the book, Nestle, right, is a company that has priced its water differently based on, as an input, priced it differently based on, where the facilities are. Do you have any understanding on how that has impacted their products or their share? What do the shareholders say? How has that impacted their bottom line?
Well, I don't have great visibility into Nestle. I just looked at some of their books that are publicly available and some of their literature. And what they did do is they put it on their balance sheet so they can begin to account for it. It is a risk. I mean, what we're seeing, which is a great thing, is this migration of sustainability from the sort of the PR coordinator in a company to it's now a CFO issue. And what they're doing is they're beginning to calculate their risk in their supply chain. And if you're Nestle, you are one of or the largest water rights holder in the world, and you have products that are surprising. I mean, I was shocked at kind of the things that I consumed that were Nestle products or my kids or whatever. And so what they're doing is just beginning to understand that they do have exposure here in their value chain, and that has ultimately a financial consequence. And so I think their handles. There's plenty of play in the wheel that they've created, but at least it's getting into their financial accounting. And as you noted, it's flexible depending on which country they're in. They can price it a certain way, and in a place where water is more scarce, they price it another way. And it's mostly a paper exercise, but I think it's a good paper exercise.
It's a good place to start.